The heavy doors of the council chamber slid open with a deep rumble that echoed through the vast hall. Commander Zethkar stepped inside, his massive frame casting long shadows across the polished metal floor. His dark blue skin showed the scars of countless battles, and his 4 arms moved with the careful precision of a warrior who had survived more fights than most soldiers ever saw. The other members of the High Command were already seated around the circular table that dominated the center of the room. Their eyes followed Zethkar as he walked to his assigned place, and he could feel their excitement in the air like electricity before a storm. Today was the day they would discuss their next conquest, and everyone knew it would be an easy one. Fleet. Admiral Korvac stood at the head of the table, his golden uniform gleaming under the bright lights. He was younger than Zethkar, but held higher rank through political connections rather than battlefield experience. His voice boomed across the chamber as he began the meeting. Fellow warriors of the Valorian Empire, today we gather to plan our greatest victory yet. Our scouts have found a perfect target for our next campaign. A small world in the outer reaches of the galaxy, inhabited by a primitive species that calls themselves humans. The other commanders leaned forward with interest. General Vextar, whose red scales always seemed to shine when he smelled blood, was the first to speak. Tell us about their defenses, Admiral. How many ships do they have? What kind of weapons? Admiral Korvac activated the holographic display in the center of the table. A 3-dimensional image of a blue and green planet appeared, slowly rotating as data scrolled alongside it. The planet is called Earth, or Sol 3 in our charts. Our long-range sensors show they have approximately 200 ships in their entire fleet. Most of them are old and use outdated technology. Their weapons are chemical-based rockets and primitive energy beams. Nothing that could even scratch the hull of our smallest cruiser. Excited murmurs filled the room. Commander Thokran, whose species had joined the Valorian Empire after being conquered 50 years ago, rubbed his hands together eagerly. How many troops do they have on the ground? Are they well trained? Intelligence suggests they have several million soldiers spread across their homeworld and a few colonies, Korvac replied. But they fight with simple ballistic weapons and chemical explosives. Our battle armor can stop their strongest attacks easily. This will be a quick campaign, perhaps only a few days. General Mordek, the oldest member of the council after Zethkar, stood up slowly. His ancient voice cracked as he spoke. What about their population? How many of these humans are there? About 8 billion on their homeworld, with maybe 2 billion more scattered across their colonies, Korvac said. Large numbers, but that just means more slaves for our empire. Think of the workforce we will gain. The excitement in the room grew stronger. Zethkar watched his fellow commanders as they began discussing how to divide the spoils of victory. He felt a cold feeling growing in his stomach, like ice water flowing through his veins. Something was wrong about this whole situation, but he could not put his finger on what it was. Then Admiral Korvac said the word that made Zethkar's blood freeze. The species calls themselves humans, Korvac repeated, pulling up more data on the display. They seem to be a fairly new spacefaring race, only about 200 years since they left their homeworld. Very young compared to most civilizations. We encounter humans. The word echoed in Zethkar's mind like a death knell. Suddenly, memories flooded back to him from his earliest days in the military academy. Stories told by the oldest instructors, tales passed down through generations, of Valorian warriors. Whispered legends about a species so dangerous that even mentioning their name was considered bad luck. But those were just stories, weren't they? Old tales meant to frighten young soldiers into being more careful in battle. Surely they could not be talking about the same species. Zethkar cleared his throat, the sound deep and rumbling. Admiral, may I ask where this intelligence comes from? How do we know these humans are as weak as our reports suggest? Korvex looked annoyed at being questioned. Our scout ships observed them from long range. The data is clear. They have inferior technology and small numbers. What more do we need to know? Perhaps we should send a diplomatic mission first, Zethkar suggested carefully, to learn more about their culture and capabilities before we commit to military action. The room fell silent. Several commanders stared at Zethkar in shock. General Vextar was the first to break the silence with harsh laughter. Diplomatic mission? Commander Zethkar, are you suggesting we negotiate with primitives? The Valorian Empire does not ask permission to take what it wants. I am suggesting. Caution, Zethkar replied, his voice steady despite the growing unease in his chest. In my experience, it is often the enemies who appear weakest that prove most dangerous. Admiral Korvex slammed his fist on the table, making the holographic display flicker. Commander, you have served this empire well for many years, but I think age is making you overcautious. These humans are nothing special. Our smallest battle group could defeat their entire fleet. Zethkar tried again. Sir, I have heard stories about a species called humans. Ancient accounts from the military archives. If these are the same beings, then we may be making a terrible mistake. Stories? General Mordak scoffed. You would have us fear bedtime tales told to children? Commander Zethkar, I expected better from a warrior of your reputation. The other commanders joined in with their own dismissive comments. Zethkar felt his heart sinking as he realized none of them were taking his warning seriously. They saw only an easy victory and the glory that would come with it. Admiral Korvex raised his hand for silence. The decision is made. I will take personal command of the invasion fleet. We will assemble 5,000 ships, including our newest dreadnoughts. The humans will surrender the moment they see our force arriving in their system. And if they don't surrender? Zethkar asked quietly. Korvex smiled, showing his sharp teeth. Then we will demonstrate why the Valorian Empire rules half the galaxy. Their resistance will last perhaps an hour before they realize the futility of fighting us. The meeting continued for another hour as the commanders discussed logistics, troop assignments, and how to divide the conquered territories. Zethkar participated when required, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about those old stories, trying to remember the details that had seemed so unimportant when he first heard them decades ago. After the meeting ended, Zethkar walked slowly back to his private quarters in the military complex. His rooms were simple but comfortable, decorated with weapons and trophies from his many campaigns. But today, none of these reminders of past victories brought him any comfort. He sat down at his personal computer terminal and began accessing the military archives. If the stories he remembered were true, then somewhere in the vast database of Valorian military history, there would be records of previous encounters with humans. Even if those records were classified or hidden away in forgotten files, he had enough security clearance to find them. As he began his search, Zethkar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in his quarters. Deep in his warrior's instincts, he knew they were about to make a mistake that could destroy everything. The Valorian Empire had built over centuries of conquest, but would anyone listen to him before it was too late? Zethkar sat alone in his quarters, the soft blue light from his computer screen casting strange shadows on the walls. For 3 hours he had been searching through the Valorian military archives, digging deeper and deeper into files that most officers never even knew existed. The deeper he went, the more his unease grew into something much worse. The first breakthrough came when he found a reference to something called the Forbidden War Reports. These were classified documents that required special permission to access, but Zethkar's rank and years of service gave him the clearance he needed. As the files opened on his screen, he felt his breathing grow shallow. The oldest report was over 2,000 years old. It came from a Crow war master named Thokran, recorded just before his species went extinct. The video file was grainy and filled with static, but Zethkar could see the fear in the alien's multiple eyes as he spoke. My name is War Master Thokran of the Krell Dominion. I am recording this as a warning to any species that might encounter the beings called humans. 3 cycles ago, our grand fleet of 50 battle cruisers encountered a single human vessel in the Outer Rim. We demanded their surrender, as is proper when facing inferior technology. Thokran paused in the recording, his breathing heavy. The human ship captain identified himself as Jake Murphy. When we told him to surrender or be destroyed, he laughed. He actually laughed at us. Then he said something I will never forget. He said, "Come and take it." Zethkar leaned closer to the screen. The Krell had been one of the most feared military powers in the galaxy before they disappeared. What could have happened to frighten them so badly? What followed was not a battle, Thokran continued. It was a lesson in terror. The human ship was smaller than our smallest escort, but Captain Murphy fought like a creature possessed by demons. He used tactics we had never seen before. He rammed our ships with his own vessel, somehow surviving impacts that should have destroyed him. He used his engine exhaust as a weapon, blinding our sensors while he struck from impossible angles. The old Krell's voice began to shake. For 18 hours, this single human ship held off our entire fleet. Murphy and his crew never stopped fighting, never showed fear, never asked for mercy. They destroyed 47 of our battle cruisers before their ship finally failed. When we boarded the wreckage, we found Murphy still alive, still trying to fight us with a piece of broken metal. Zethkar felt his heart beating faster. 1 ship against 50, and the humans had nearly won. But the worst part, Thokran whispered, was what Murphy said when we captured him. He looked at us with those strange human eyes and smiled. He said, "You think this is over? My people are coming, and they're going to be very angry about what you did here." 3 days later, human ships began appearing throughout Krell space. They hunted us like animals. Within 1 cycle, the Krell Dominion was no more. The recording ended, leaving Zethkar staring at a blank screen. He quickly searched for more files, and what he found made his hands tremble as he read. The next report came from a Zephyrian shock trooper named Klexdar. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy as fearless warriors who felt no pain and showed no mercy. But in this recording, Klexdar was clearly terrified. The siege of Kepler Station lasted 6 days, the Zephyrian said, his voice barely above a whisper. We sent wave after wave of our best troops through the main corridor, expecting easy victory. The station had only a small human garrison, and most of them had already fallen back to the inner sections. Klexdar paused, his breathing unsteady. But there was one human who stayed behind. A female Marine named Lisa Carter. She held that corridor alone for 6 days against everything we could throw at her. We sent 100 warriors at once, then 200, then 500. It didn't matter. She killed them all. Zethkar could hardly believe what he was hearing. 1 human soldier holding off hundreds of trained warriors? Carter had taken position behind makeshift barriers made from debris and fallen support beams, Klexdar continued. She used every weapon she could find, switching from rifles to pistols, to grenades when her ammunition ran low. When she ran out of standard weapons, she used pieces of metal as throwing knives. When those were gone, she used her bare hands. The Zephyrian warrior began to sob, something Zethkar had never seen from their species before. By the 4th day, we were stepping over mountains of our own dead just to reach her position. The corridor was painted red with blood, and the smell of death was so strong that even our gas masks couldn't filter it out. But Carter just kept fighting. She never retreated, never surrendered, never even seemed to get tired. On the 6th day, human reinforcements finally arrived, Klexdar said. When they found Carter, she was still alive, still holding her position. The humans counted over 300 of our dead in that corridor. 300 of the galaxy's finest warriors, killed by one human female with basic infantry weapons. The recording showed Klexdar looking directly into the camera with hollow eyes. After that battle, no Zephyrian warrior would enter an enclosed space if they knew humans were present. We developed what your doctors would call a phobia. The fearless Zephyrians, afraid of doorways and corridors because of one human marine, named Lisa Carter. Zethkar sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. These couldn't be real accounts, could they? But the files were authentic, verified by Valorian intelligence. The dates, locations, and details all checked out. He opened another file. This one from the archives of the Nexus Collective. The Nexus had been a massive empire controlling hundreds of star systems before they mysteriously collapsed 3 centuries ago. Now Zethkar was beginning to understand why. The report was from Admiral Vorthak of the Nexus Navy, recorded during something called the Battle of the Crimson Nebula. High Command ordered me to take 800 ships to eliminate a small human fleet that had been raiding our supply convoys. Intelligence reported only 12 human vessels, obsolete designs with inferior weapons. It should have been a simple cleanup operation. Admiral Vorth's image on the screen showed a being that looked exhausted and defeated. The human fleet was commanded by Admiral Pete Harrison. When we arrived at the nebula, Harrison sent us a message. He said, "You brought too many ships. This is going to be embarrassing for you." We thought he was bluffing or insane. The Nexus Admiral laughed bitterly. For 3 months, Harrison's 12 ships picked apart our fleet piece by piece. They used the nebula's radiation to hide from our sensors, appearing just long enough to destroy 1 or 2 of our vessels before vanishing again. They struck at our supply ships, our communication relays, our command vessels. We never knew where they would hit next. Zethkar leaned forward, fascinated despite his growing horror. Harrison's tactics made no sense according to any military doctrine we knew, Vorthak continued. His ships would attack from multiple directions simultaneously, even though they didn't have enough vessels to do so effectively. Somehow, they made it work. They moved through the nebula like ghosts, striking where we least expected and disappearing before we could respond. The Admiral's voice dropped to a whisper. By the end of the 3rd month, we had lost over 700 ships. 700 vessels destroyed by 12 human ships that shouldn't have been able to threaten even one of our cruisers. When High Command finally ordered our retreat, Harrison sent us another message. He said, "Thanks for the target practice. Come back anytime." Zethkar closed the file and sat in silence for several minutes. These weren't just military defeats. These were systematic demonstrations of human superiority in warfare. Every account showed the same pattern. Humans who refused to surrender, who fought with impossible determination, and who used tactics that made no logical sense, but somehow worked perfectly. He opened one more file, this one marked with the highest security classification. It was a personal journal entry from a Valorian scout named Jektar, recorded just 50 years ago. "I have seen them," Jektar wrote, "the humans. I was part of a deep reconnaissance mission that discovered one of their colonies under attack by pirate raiders. We stayed hidden and observed, thinking we would gather intelligence on both species." The journal entry continued with details that made Zethkar's blood run cold. The colonists were not soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, children. When the pirates attacked, we expected quick surrender. Instead, the humans organized themselves into a fighting force in less than 1 day. They turned farming equipment into weapons, used their knowledge of the local terrain to set traps, and fought with a coordination that would impress our best military units. Jektar's final entry was the most disturbing of all. The pirates outnumbered the colonists 5-1 and had superior weapons and armor. But after 2 weeks of fighting, it was the pirates who retreated. These human civilians, with no military training, defeated professional raiders through sheer determination and ingenuity. When it was over, the colonists went back to their normal lives as if nothing had happened. I recommended in my report that we avoid all contact with human space, Jektar concluded. High Command classified the report and ordered me never to speak of it. But I fear that someday, someone will make the mistake of underestimating these creatures. When that day comes, I pray to the Anchest. Zethkar spent the rest of the night reading more files, his sleep forgotten as he discovered the true horror of human military thinking. What he found was worse than simple battlefield victories. The humans did not just fight wars, they changed the very nature of warfare itself, turning it into something that broke the minds of their enemies as much as their armies. The next file he opened contained a report from Commander Draktos of the Hegemony Intelligence Service. The Hegemony had been one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, with spy networks that reached into every corner of known space. But even they had been unprepared for human methods. The incident began when one of our patrol fleets encountered a human exploration ship, Draktos had written. The vessel was clearly civilian, carrying scientific equipment and marked with peaceful symbols. Our fleet commander, following standard procedure, ordered the ship to stop for inspection. Zethkar continued reading, his unease growing with each line. The human ship captain, who identified himself as Roy Adams, complied with our demands and allowed a boarding party aboard. Everything seemed normal until our troops entered the main corridor. That was when the music started. Music? Zethkar frowned at the screen. What could music have to do with warfare? The sounds that came from the ship's communication system were unlike anything in our cultural database. The report continued. The humans called it death metal, harsh, aggressive. Sounds with no recognizable melody. The volume was so loud that our troops' communication equipment began to malfunction. Worse, the psychological effect on our soldiers was immediate and severe. The Hegemony commander's account grew more disturbing as Zethkar read on. While our boarding party was disoriented by the music, Captain Adams began ramming our ships with his own vessel. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. He struck our cruisers at angles that should have destroyed his ship instantly. Yet somehow his vessel remained intact while ours suffered massive damage. Zethkar paused his reading to think about this. Ramming tactics were suicide attacks, used only when a commander had no other options. But Adams had used ramming as his primary strategy, turning his ship into a weapon while somehow keeping it operational. The combination of psychological warfare and impossible flying tactics created panic among our fleet. Draktos wrote, our ships began firing on each other by mistake, thinking they were under attack from multiple directions. Within 2 hours, Captain Adams had disabled 6 of our vessels without using a single conventional weapon. When our surviving ships retreated, Adams broadcast a message on all frequencies. That was fun. Come back anytime you want to dance. The report concluded with a note that chilled Zethkar to his core. Following this incident, the Hegemony issued a standing order to avoid all contact with human vessels. The psychological profiles of our surviving crew members showed permanent trauma from what they described as weaponized insanity. Captain Adams had turned a routine inspection into a nightmare that haunted our people for years. Zethkar moved to the next file, this one from a crystalline hive mind collective. The crystallines were known for their logical thinking and perfect coordination. They conquered worlds through superior organization and flawless tactical execution. But their encounter with humanity had shattered their confidence in their own methods. The human vessel was a simple cargo transport, the crystalline report stated in their typical emotionless style. Scans showed minimal defensive capabilities, and a crew of only 12 individuals. Standard boarding protocols were initiated to capture the ship and interrogate the crew. The crystallines had perfected boarding tactics over centuries of conquest. Their soldiers moved in perfect synchronization, overwhelming enemy ships through sheer coordination and superior numbers. No species had ever successfully resisted their boarding procedures. The human engineer, identified as Lieutenant Amy Foster, was alone in the engine room when our forces breached the hull, the report continued. Rather than surrender or attempt to flee, Foster began manipulating the ship's life support systems in ways that defied all logical protocols. Zethkar read the detailed account with growing amazement. Foster had turned the cargo ship into a death trap using nothing but the standard systems that kept the crew alive. She had released toxic gases in some sections while creating oxygen-rich environments in others, then used the ship's electrical systems to create sparks that turned those areas into explosive traps. The human altered gravity fields throughout the ship, making some corridors impossible to navigate, while others became vertical death traps, the crystallines reported. She used the temperature control systems to create freezing zones and superheated areas, forcing our troops to constantly adapt their equipment and tactics. But the most incredible part came next. Foster activated the ship's weather simulation systems, which were designed to provide Earth-like conditions for the crew's psychological well-being. She turned these systems into weapons, creating localized lightning storms in the corridors and using the artificial rain systems to conduct electricity throughout the ship. The crystalline boarding force, which had never failed in over 1,000 operations, found themselves trapped aboard a ship that seemed to be actively trying to kill them. Foster had turned every system designed to sustain life into a weapon of war. After 6 hours of combat, our forces retreated from the human vessel, the report concluded. Lieutenant Foster had eliminated 47 boarding troops using only the ship's environmental systems. Following this incident, the Crystalline Collective issued a permanent ban on boarding human vessels. The psychological impact of facing an enemy who could weaponize the very air they breathed was deemed too dangerous for our troops to endure. Zethkar sat back in his chair, his mind struggling to process what he was reading. These humans did not just fight with weapons. They turned everything around them into instruments of war. They used sound collision, even the basic life support systems, as tools of destruction. The next file was even more disturbing. It came from the Drakmor clan, a species that prided itself on being the most savage warriors in known space. The Drakmor lived for battle and showed no fear of death. Yet their encounter with humanity had left them so traumatized that they abandoned an entire sector of space. The human colony of New Terra was defended by only civilian population, the Drakmor war chief had recorded. Our intelligence showed farmers, teachers, children, and shopkeepers. No military installations, no trained soldiers, no defensive positions. It should have been a simple raid to gather slaves and supplies. The Drakmor had attacked with 5 clans, over 10,000 of their finest warriors. They expected to overwhelm the colony in a matter of hours and return home with their prizes. The human leader was a man named Captain Ben Clark, the war chief continued. He was not a soldier, but had been a police officer on their homeworld. When our ships appeared in orbit, Clark did something that made no sense to our way of thinking. Instead of surrendering or fleeing, he began organizing the colonists into military units. Zethkar read the account with growing disbelief. Clark had turned farmers into artillery crews, using their crop harvesting equipment to launch explosive charges at the Drakmor landing parties. Teachers became communications specialists, coordinating defensive positions across the colony. Even children were given roles in the defensive network, serving as messengers and spotters. The humans used their knowledge of the local terrain to create killing fields where none should have existed, the Drakmor reported. They turned their irrigation systems into flood traps, used their grain silos as fortified positions, and converted their farming vehicles into mobile weapons platforms. But what disturbed the Drakmor most was the human psychological warfare. The colonists would broadcast messages to our warriors during battle, the war chief wrote. They would tell us about their families, their homes, their reasons for fighting. They made us see them not as prey, but as individuals with lives and dreams. This was a form of mental attack we had never encountered. The siege lasted for 3 months. The Drakmor, who had expected quick victory, found themselves fighting an enemy that grew stronger and more organized with each passing day. The humans learned from every attack, adapted to every tactic, and developed countermeasures for every strategy the Drakmor employed. By the end of the first month, we were no longer attacking, the war chief admitted. We were simply trying to survive. The humans had reverse-engineered our weapons, learned our communication codes, and even began using our own tactics against us. Captain Clark had turned his civilian population into a military force that surpassed our own professional warriors. The final entry in the Drakmor file was the most chilling of all. When our relief ships arrived, they found that the humans had not only survived, but had captured 12 of our war chiefs and forced them to reveal our clan's military secrets. The colonists had also built new weapons using our own technology, improving upon designs that had taken us centuries to develop. The human Captain Clark met with our fleet commander under a flag of truce, the account concluded. He offered to release our captured warriors and share the technological improvements they had made, but only if we agreed never to attack human settlements again. Our FL. Jethkar's search through the archives had revealed something far worse than battlefield defeats. As he dug deeper into the classified files, he discovered the ultimate truth about human warfare. They did not just win battles, they made sure their enemies could never threaten them again. Every civilization that had made the mistake of attacking humanity first had paid a price, so terrible that it served as a warning to the entire galaxy. The first case he found was the fate of the hegemony of worlds. This had been one of the largest empires in galactic history, controlling over 300 star systems with a population of nearly 1 trillion beings. Their military was vast, their technology advanced, and their intelligence networks reached into every corner of known space. They had seemed unstoppable until they made one fatal error. The file showed a recording from Hegemony High Admiral Vextroth, made during what became known as the Final War. The humans had established a colony ship carrying 10,000 settlers to a world in disputed territory, the Admiral reported. High Command decided to make an example of them. We destroyed the colony ship with all hands, expecting this show of force would make other human settlements withdraw from the region. Zethkar paused the recording, already knowing this story would not end well for the hegemony. The pattern was always the same. Some alien civilization would attack what appeared to be weak human targets, expecting easy victory. They never understood what they were unleashing. Within 3 days of destroying the colony ship, strange things began happening. Throughout hegemony space, Admiral Vextroth continued, communication networks started failing, supply convoys disappeared, and government officials began reporting that their personal information had been leaked to resistance groups on their own worlds. The hegemony had initially assumed these were random technical failures or local rebellions. They had no idea that human special forces teams had already infiltrated their territory and were systematically taking apart their empire from within. The human operatives did not attack our military directly, the Admiral explained, his voice growing more strained with each word. Instead, they targeted our infrastructure, our communications, our supply lines. Teams led by officers like Colonel Steve Martinez and Major Kate Williams moved through our space like ghosts, striking at targets we never thought to defend. Zethkar read the detailed reports of human infiltration tactics with growing horror. The humans had not tried to fight the massive hegemony military machine head-on. Instead, they had studied their enemies' weaknesses and attacked them in ways the hegemony could not defend against. They poisoned our data networks with viruses that made our computers turn against us, Admiral Vextroth reported. They sabotaged our manufacturing facilities so that our own equipment would fail at critical moments. They even infiltrated our food distribution systems, causing shortages that led to riots on dozens of worlds. But the most devastating human tactic was their psychological warfare. The human teams had begun broadcasting personal information about hegemony leaders to their own populations. Military officers found their secret bank accounts exposed to the public. Politicians discovered their private communications leaked to their enemies. Corporate leaders watched as their illegal activities were broadcast across their home worlds. Within 6 months, the hegemony was fighting civil wars on half our worlds, the Admiral continued. Our own people turned against us because the humans had shown them the corruption and lies that held our empire together. We were not defeated by human weapons, but by our own citizens who finally knew the truth about their leaders. The recording ended with Admiral Vextroth's final transmission. The humans have accomplished in 1 year what no external enemy could do in a century. They have destroyed the hegemony of worlds without fighting a single major battle. This is not warfare as we understand it. This is something far more terrible. Zethkar moved to the next file, this one documenting the fate of the Void Seekers. These beings were creatures of pure energy who could travel through space without ships and had no physical form that conventional weapons could harm. They had believed themselves invulnerable to human retaliation when they vaporized a human research station orbiting a neutron star. The sole survivor of that attack was Dr. Alan Roberts, a theoretical physicist who had been conducting experiments with energy containment fields. The Void Seekers had thought one human scientist posed no threat to their entire species. They could not have been more wrong. Dr. Roberts spent 5 years developing technology specifically designed to trap and contain energy-based life forms. The report stated, he used his knowledge of the Void Seekers' attack patterns to create specialized containment fields that could hold beings of pure energy indefinitely. When Roberts finally struck back, he did not simply kill a few Void Seekers in revenge. Instead, he captured their entire species, trapping thousands of energy beings in containment cells that served as living batteries for human war machines. The irony was perfect, the report noted. The Void Seekers, who had considered themselves above physical limitations, became slaves to the very technology they had tried to destroy. Dr. Roberts had turned them into a renewable energy source that powered human ships for decades. The file included recordings of captured Void Seekers begging for death rather than continued imprisonment. Their energy forms flickered weakly in their containment cells as they provided power for the human vessels that patrolled their former territory. The proud beings who had once roamed free through space were reduced to living fuel for their enemies. But the most horrifying case was the fate of the Infinite Swarm. These creatures were a hive mind species of trillions of insectoid beings that moved through space in vast clouds, consuming entire planets and leaving nothing but dead worlds behind. They had seemed unstoppable until they devoured a human agricultural world and encountered Staff Sergeant Nina Cross and her unit of combat engineers. The swarm had never faced biological warfare before, the report explained. Their hive mind made them incredibly efficient, but also created a single point of failure. Sergeant Cross and her team had developed a virus specifically designed to target hive mind neural connections. Zethkar read the technical details with sick fascination. Cross's team had created a biological weapon that did not kill the swarm creatures but instead severed their mental connections to each other. Individual insects that had once been part of a unified intelligence were suddenly cut off from the collective consciousness that gave their lives meaning. The virus spread through the swarm's neural network faster than they could develop immunity, the report continued. Within weeks, trillions of creatures were driven insane by the sudden isolation. They turned on each other, unable to understand why they could no longer hear the comforting voice of the hive mind. The Infinite Swarm, which had terrorized entire sectors of the galaxy for millennia, destroyed itself in a frenzy of confusion and madness. The survivors scattered across dead worlds, mindless and broken, haunting the ruins of planets they had once consumed. Sergeant Cross had achieved something no military force in galactic history had managed, the report concluded. She had eliminated an entire species without killing them. The former infinite swarm now exists only as scattered, insane creatures that serve as a reminder of what happens when humanity is pushed too far. As Zethkar continued reading, he discovered that every species that had attacked humanity first had suffered similar fates. The crystalline collective had been turned into living computers, their logical minds enslaved to serve human research projects. The Dratmore clans had been genetically modified to remove their aggressive instincts, turning the galaxy's fiercest warriors into peaceful farmers. The Shadow Fleet had been trapped in a dimensional prison, unable to escape, but conscious enough to regret their decision to attack. Human space. Each case showed the same pattern. Humans did not simply defeat their enemies, they transformed them into examples that would terrify other species for generations. They studied their opponents' weaknesses and strengths, then used that knowledge to create punishments that were perfectly tailored to each species. Worst fears, the humans had turned revenge into an art form. They did not just win wars, they made sure those wars could never happen again. Every enemy that survived a conflict with humanity was changed so fundamentally that they could no longer pose a threat to anyone. Zethkar found one final file that made his blood freeze in his veins. It was a message from the Council of Neutral Worlds, the organization that tried to maintain peace between different species. The message was simple but terrifying in its implications. To all civilizations receiving this transmission, under no circumstances should any military action be taken against human settlements or vessels. Humanity has demonstrated that they do not distinguish between military and civilian targets when seeking revenge. Any attack on human interests, no matter how small, will result in systematic retaliation against your entire species. The humans have shown that they are willing and able to destroy civilizations that threaten them, the message continued. They do not. The morning of the final War Council arrived with the artificial sunrise that lit the command center of the Valorian military complex. Zethkar stood before the massive doors, carrying data tablets filled with the evidence he had gathered through the night. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared to make his last attempt to save his people from their own arrogance. Inside the council chamber, Admiral Corvex was already addressing the assembled commanders, his voice filled with excitement and confidence. Today we finalize the greatest military operation in Valorian history. 5,000 ships, 10 million troops, and enough firepower to glass an entire planet. The humans will surrender the moment they see our fleet. Zethkar entered the chamber and raised his hand to speak. Admiral, I must share critical intelligence about our target before we proceed. Corvex turned toward him with an annoyed expression. Commander Zethkar, we have already discussed this. Your concerns about these primitive humans are noted, but irrelevant. Our decision is final. Sir, I have spent the night reviewing classified military archives, Zethkar said, activating his data tablets. The evidence shows that every species that has attacked humanity has suffered consequences beyond simple military defeat. I have documentation of enough. General Vextar interrupted, his red scales flashing with anger. Commander, you are embarrassing yourself with these ancient stories. We are the Valorian Empire. We have conquered half the galaxy. No primitive species poses a threat to our might. Zethkar tried again. General, the hegemony of worlds thought the same thing. They destroyed one human colony ship and lost their entire empire within a year. The humans did not attack their military directly, but destroyed their civilization from within. General Mordak waved a dismissive hand. Assuming these stories are true, which I doubt, those other species were clearly inferior to us. The Valorians have survived and prospered for over 1,000 years. We are not some weak empire that falls to terrorist tactics. The Void Seekers believed they were invulnerable because they had no physical form, Zethkar continued desperately. They are now living batteries powering human ships. The Infinite Swarm controlled trillions of creatures across hundreds of worlds. They destroyed themselves after one human engineer created a virus that broke their hive mind. Admiral Corvex slammed his fist on the table. Commander Zethkar, you will cease this foolishness immediately. I am beginning to question whether age has affected your judgment. Perhaps you should consider retirement. The threat was clear. Zethkar could continue his warnings and face court-martial, or he could remain silent and watch his civilization march toward destruction. He looked around the chamber at his fellow commanders, seeing only excitement and bloodlust in their eyes. None of them would listen to reason. Very well, Admiral, Zethkar said quietly. I have done my duty by warning you. The responsibility for what follows rests with the High Command. Excellent, Corvex replied with a cruel smile. And to ensure you have a front-row seat to witness our glorious victory, I am assigning you to the invasion fleet as senior tactical advisor. You will see firsthand how wrong your fears were. 3 days later, Zethkar stood on the bridge of the flagship Valorian Pride, watching as the massive invasion fleet assembled in space around them. 5,000 ships of various sizes filled the void, from massive dreadnoughts capable of destroying moons to fast attack vessels designed for boarding operations. It was the largest military force ever assembled by the Valorian Empire. Admiral Corvex stood at the center of the bridge, surrounded by tactical displays showing the fleet's formation. Begin jump sequence to the Sol system, he ordered. Today, we add Earth to our list of conquered worlds. The jump through hyperspace took 6 hours. When they emerged at the edge of the Sol system, long-range sensors immediately detected the human response. Zethkar watched the tactical displays with growing dread as the information appeared on screen. Human fleet detected, the sensor operator reported. Approximately 200 vessels, mostly cruiser and destroyer class. They are maintaining formation around the third planet. Admiral Corvex laughed loudly. 200 ships against 5,000? This will be over before lunch. Open a communication channel to their fleet commander. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a human vessel. The man who appeared was middle-aged with graying hair and calm eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a simple military uniform with the insignia of an admiral. I am Admiral Jack Taylor of the United Earth Defense Force, the human said. You are entering human space with what appears to be an invasion fleet. I am giving you one chance to turn around and leave peacefully. Corvex stepped forward, puffing out his chest with pride. I am Fleet Admiral Corvex of the Valorian Empire. You will surrender immediately and prepare your planet for occupation. Resistance is futile against our superior numbers. Admiral Taylor smiled slightly. Admiral, with respect, you have no idea what you're dealing with. Turn your ships around now, while you still can. Are you threatening me? Corvex demanded angrily. You have 200 ships against my 5,000. What possible threat could you pose? Admiral, Taylor replied calmly, we've been monitoring your communications for the past 3 months. We know about your invasion plans, your fleet composition, and your tactical doctrines. We've had time to prepare appropriate countermeasures. Last chance, leave now or face the consequences. Corvex cut the communication channel and turned to his officers. Begin attack formation. Target their largest ships first. This pathetic display of bravado ends now. The Valorian fleet spread out into battle formation, 5,000 ships moving with practiced precision toward the small human force. Zethkar watched the tactical displays, noting something that made his skin crawl. The human ships were not retreating or attempting to flee. Instead, they were advancing steadily, maintaining perfect formation, even while facing impossible odds. First wave, commence firing. Admiral Korvax ordered. The Valorian dreadnoughts unleashed their main guns, sending streams of energy toward the human fleet. But as the weapons reached their targets, something impossible happened. The human ships seemed to dance around the incoming fire, moving in ways that defied physics. Ships that should have been destroyed continued fighting, their hulls crackling with some kind of energy field that absorbed or deflected the Valorian weapons. What kind of defensive technology is that? General Vextar demanded from his position at the tactical station. Before anyone could answer, the human fleet opened fire. Their weapons were unlike anything in Valorian databases, beams of coherent energy that punched through Valorian shields as if they did not exist. The first wave of Valorian ships began exploding almost immediately. "Impossible," Admiral Korvax shouted. Their technology readings showed primitive weapons. How are they penetrating our defenses? Zethkar watched in horror as Captain Lucy Chun's destroyer deliberately rammed into a Valorian battleship 3 times its size. Instead of being destroyed by the collision, Chun's ship somehow survived the impact while the massive Valorian vessel split in half, its hull torn open like paper. "Admiral, we're receiving strange readings from the human ships," the sensor operator reported. "Their hulls appear to be adapting to our weapons in real time. Each time we hit them, they become more resistant to that type of damage." On another section of the battlefield, Commander Frank Baker's cruiser was using its engine exhaust as a weapon, positioning itself to blind Valorian sensors while smaller human ships attacked from impossible angles. The human tactics made no logical sense. According to any military doctrine Zethkar knew, but they were devastatingly effective. "Second wave, advance and engage," Korvax ordered desperately. "Overwhelm them with numbers." But as more Valorian ships entered the battle, the situation only grew worse. The humans seemed to be learning from each engagement, adapting their tactics in real time to counter Valorian strategies. Ships that survived one attack became nearly invulnerable to similar weapons on the next attempt. Hours passed, and the battle that Admiral Korvax had predicted would last minutes showed no signs of ending. Worse yet, human reinforcements were arriving from hidden bases throughout the system. Ships emerged from behind asteroids, from the shadows of planets, and even from what appeared to be empty space. "Admiral, we've lost over 2,000 ships," General Mordak reported, his voice shaking. "The humans have lost maybe 50 vessels, and most of those are still operational despite heavy damage." Zethkar realized with growing horror that the humans were not just defending themselves. They were systematically dismantling the Valorian fleet with surgical precision. Every human ship seemed to know exactly where to strike for maximum effect, as if they had studied Valorian technology for years. "How is this possible?" Admiral Korvax whispered, staring at the tactical displays in disbelief. His answer came in the form of a new transmission from Admiral Taylor. The human admiral appeared on screen again, but this time he was not alone. Behind him stood officers from dozens of different alien species, all wearing human military uniforms. "Admiral Korvax," Taylor said calmly, "allow me to introduce my staff. Commander Thokarin here is formerly of the Krell Dominion. Lieutenant Vexara served with the Hegemony. Intelligence,